Now I got a pretty fun pattern for you today. It's going to be a short intro because there's not a lot of history on this, but it is a pretty cool bug. Hello everybody, welcome to Savage Flies. I'm Matt, thanks for stopping by. So the pattern I'm talking about is the October Caddis. Now I got it from David Klausmeyer's Favorite Flies. You'll find a variation of this bug in all kinds of books out there and lots of variations of it. I'm tying it the wet fly version today. Now, what exactly is the October Caddis? Well, it's not a caddis fly that everybody has. It's a pretty important fly out in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia. There's not a lot of it here in the Mid-Atlantic or New England. There are a few rivers down in Smoky Mountain that have an October caddis, but basically it's just a big caddis. It's an orangish, amber, rust, brown kind of color, and typically the adults are size 6 or 8, so it looks like a big moth when you have it. And if you fish trout waters that do have an October caddis hatch, you probably already know about it. It's probably a pretty big deal. But what about those of us who don't fish waters that have an October caddis hatch? How could we use a pattern like this? Well, there are over 7,000 species of caddisflies out there. If you fish in any trout water, you've probably got some kind of caddisflies hatching. So just see what color yours are and roughly what size. So maybe you tie this a little bit smaller and change the color. Make it an olive, make it a lighter brown, even a tan or a black. There are some black caddisflies out there. So it's a pretty versatile pattern. And, tie it in various sizes to match the hatches you've got going on. So that's it. Pretty simple pattern. Fun one to tie. Think you're going to like it? Let's give it a shot. There it is in the vise, an October Caddis. Now that's certainly a pretty shaggy looking bug, and it's a big bug. Sizes in a 6 or 8. I'm going to tie this in an 8. Let's go ahead and pinch that barb right there. This is a 2 extra long, 1 extra strong wet fly hook. And for your thread, it's an orange or a rusty brown or a rust color. That's typically the color of these bugs. So I'm using a rusty brown. I'll lay a base down to the start of the bend. And first thing we're going to catch in is pearl tinsel. So a flat pearlescent tinsel in a size medium. I think you could get away with a small, but I held it up to the hook and I think the medium is going to look just a bit better. One of the coolest things about big fuzzy wet flies and nymphs like this is you don't have to worry about lumps. When you're doing a fancy, pretty wet fly, you got to be real careful with your thread wraps right there. Let's get that thing out of the way. Now, if you don't have a material clip, they do have something called a vise pawn, which is just a magnet, or you can get one of these little disc magnets, pack of 10 from Home Depot for a couple of bucks. That's what I use as my material clip. Now, let's put some wax on here. So we're going to use a big wet fly dubbing, and I'm going to use a rabbit. And it's an orange. This is more of an orange than a rusty brown, but I think either is going to be fine. I think a little bit orange is going to be just a little bit better. So let's put a pretty fat noodle on here, maybe 3 inches or so. It might take us a couple of applications to get all the way up, because we're going to dub the whole body to just maybe 2 eye lengths back behind the eye. Okay, a little bit more wax and a little bit more dubbing. Okay, I think that looks fine. Might have gone a little bit farther than I intended to, but we'll be okay. And I thought about mixing a little bit of sparkle in with this dubbing before I put it on, but I skipped that. I mean, the original doesn't call for it, but I thought it might have looked pretty cool. But I didn't because I'm using this pearlescent rib, so it's going to give it the little bit of flash that an emerging caddis might have on it, to kind of imitate the air bubbles. So let's go ahead and wrap this all the way up. A couple of wraps to catch this off up front. That one didn't get it. This one did. Okay, snip this excess and a few wraps to just really secure this right here. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna fluff this out, fuzz it up a little bit with my little Velcro right here. So if you didn't want to do this, I suppose you could have made a spikier dubbing to begin with. You know, maybe mix some guard hairs in. I think it's just easier to do this, and you know, in a couple of seconds you get a little bit of a fuzzy body, and I think that looks good right there. Now the next thing we're going to put on is a Partridge hackle for the legs. Now this one is a brown. If you don't have a dyed brown, you can use natural, it's going to be fine. But this bug is kind of an orangish brown color, both the adult and the nymph. So if you have a brown, yeah, by all means use it, but if not, you can get away with a natural. Okay, let's get that caught in right there. I want to fold this back over, put a couple wraps going forward just to really lock it in. Now I can snip this tip off right here. I'm going to need my hackle pliers because I've only got about an inch long feather here. Okay, I'm thinking 3 wraps. We'll see what 3 does for us. I mean, it is kind of buggy. That's 2. I think 3 is all I'd be able to get. I'd be running out of fibers on this hackle anyway, so I think that's it right there. Every fiber on this feather is now on my hook. So a couple wraps to secure that. Now let's get rid of that stem. And let's just push this back. It looks a little bit like a spider, but it's not a spider. It's a fairly swept back wet fly, almost nymph looking bug. I mean, you fish it as a wet fly, but it's imitating the emerging caddis. So I'm going to go back just a little bit farther right there because we've got one more component we're putting on this big guy. All right, those legs look pretty good. Now the last component is from your pheasant. So I'm using this feather that I used on the Miss Simpson last week. When you pull this whole feather out, what you've got, that little feather underneath. This is called a aftershaft feather. So this little guy right here, if you tied up a bunch of Mrs. Simpsons, you've got a lot of these feathers left over. All right, to tie in this aftershaft feather, just, cut a little, or peel a little bit of that off right there. 3 or 4 wraps. It's a fairly, pliable stem right there. So you can, it doesn't take too many wraps to squish it down. And now I might need my hackle pliers for this, but you know what? I'm going to try to do it without them. We'll see how it goes. I'm only going to put maybe 3 wraps of this guy on. Just giving us a little bit of a fuzzy head. Kind of reminds you of another polyroseboro nymph, maybe the muskrat nymph, but that's an ostrich hurl up front. So let's catch this thing off with a couple of wraps and snip this excess. See what we got. Got a little bit of a fuzzy head. Let's just kind of pull it back and create some room for the whip finish. Doesn't take too many wraps right here. I think that's going to be just fine. See if I can get a 3 or 4 turn whip finish on right here and have some room for the head cement. And we did. Might have a little bit of cleanup here. Nah, it's fuzzy, but you know what? I'm going to leave it fuzzy. I'm going to just put some head cement on it and then put this thing in my box. And it's September, the October caddises, in the waters where they hatch, you know, they'll be out pretty soon, within the next few weeks. So, worth giving a shot. But that's it, everybody. Pretty cool pattern, pretty fun to tie. I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.